in the time that's remaining before the next theater, just a short question and answer. We'll start here, Harvey's Cup, and then I'm hoping to get some questions and answers from the audience as well, and audio feedback. So I'm really, really honored to have to be here. I had nothing to do with any of this. Although Facing History and ourselves started in 1976 in Brookline, so maybe it's not an accident that it's all part of that story. But maybe I think I should start with you, Steve, since you're working in the town. Can you just give us some insight into how this project started? You were right there.
Sure, thank you. This was one of my most fantastic experiences of being here this evening and seeing the film that Harvey put together. All these years, absolutely fantastic. Yeah, it was back in 1990, and Selectman Chris Crowley contacted me and said, the Holocaust Memorial Committee wants to do something constructive. Would you be willing to staff it? It needs a lot of logistics, coordination, facilitation. And I said I would be privileged. I would feel really privileged to do that. I lost family members in the Holocaust, and that said absolutely. I had also worked with Brookline Access Television, with some other TV shows with them. I had some experience, so I said sure, absolutely.
And you just before when we met, you were telling me that there was you had another idea for this project, not interviews at the beginning.
Yeah, Regine and Leon and I sat down. We were talking about what are we going to do. And at that time, there was a big push to have a monument built, a Holocaust memorial in the town. And both Regine and Leon said, the New England Holocaust Memorial near Faneuil Hall exists, and we don't need another monument here in Brookline. What we have is all of these survivors, these witnesses, survivors of concentration camps, survivors of the Holocaust, and we also have American soldiers who were witnesses to the Holocaust. We should be interviewing them. We should do something.
Great. I think it's a really powerful choice, and not necessarily an obvious choice. So Brookline also was lucky to be able to work with Larry Langer. Larry, I mean, yeah, I could go on about what a remarkable man this Larry is, and how much insight he really brought to this.
Go on, my wife is listening.
Yeah, but we only got a few minutes, Larry, so I'll do it after. But Larry, one of the things that you and I have talked about is that these testimony were done before Schindler's List, and in some ways, for people who know Holocaust testimony, it's a turning point. So help explain kind of why you see that as a turning point here.
Well, you know, I didn't realize that this went for 5 years. Some of these interviews were done after Schindler's List, which I think was 1993. And Schindler's List has caused so much mischief in the survivor community because survivors interviewed after Schindler's List have taken moments from the film as if they were historically accurate, and it's affected their testimony. And I'm struck by many things, but how remarkable it is that not a single witness who was interviewed after Schindler's List allowed that film to interfere with the integrity and honesty of their testimony at all. But there's one thing I have to say to Harvey. You know, I cherish these testimonies. I don't like anyone interfering with them. And I was a little apprehensive. I think this film is beyond admiration. There are a dozen pitfalls you could have fallen into in making this film, and I don't think you fell into a single one of them.
And Harvey knows what that means, Larry. Thank you. So Harvey, so you have 90, I've heard actually a number of numbers. I've heard 80, 90, 100 hours. You really only got these tapes, I know this because I'm on the Brooklyn Holocaust Commission, you only get these tapes digitized in July. So if for folks who know something about film, that's moving awfully quickly. Forget, you know, having to go back over all of that footage. So can you just give us some insight into
what you did to get the film ready for this evening, and just some of your vision for the next steps.
Sure. What was the first question? Sorry.
How do you get this film ready between July and now, and what is some of your vision for the next steps?
Well, one of the difficulties was, I could see some people in the room here who are filmmakers, and so you know how much work is done in the edit suite and how much work it's preparing for the edit suite. So with a limited amount of money, where the money gets spent is in the edit suite. So, and I'm not an editor, so I had to watch all of it several times and piece together elements of it without being able to see it together, which is very difficult to do, but also it was just my time, which I had decided was available. So I tried to go by criteria, and so the criteria I went by was first person testimony, even if their family member saw it, that I wouldn't include it. I didn't want anyone dispute, if they were going to dispute what was said in the film, they had to dispute what they said they saw with their own eyes. And I've worked a lot with interviews, not these kind of interviews, but I've worked a lot with interviews, and I always feel that in an interview, the person will always answer all of the questions, and when Larry Langer's asking you the questions, they're important because they're part of a record, and that record is important. But there's also something that they came to say, and I tried to capture what they came to say. And what we'd like to do in the future is raise more capital and revenue for it, and to get people like Larry and historians from Facing History on our team so that we can delve into subject matters that we couldn't in this because they require context, and it wouldn't have been fair to the testimony to include those segments without really proper historical testimony or expert advice. So that was awkward, but I'm going to pass it on.
So what I actually want to do is turn the questions over to y'all. I mean, there's so many of you have connections to people here on the screen. So I'd just love to hear what you're thinking, and you have amazing people to answer these questions. I know that there's a mic there, and I'm going to break some protocol because let me hand this one out so we can get a mic out quicker to people.
Good evening, and thank you so very much. My name is Martha Pencer, and I'm the daughter of Victor Pencer. As a child of survivors, my mother, 95 years old, is here with us today. The greatest challenge of history is how do we respond ourselves in our own time? And I appreciate very much, Harvey, that you make that witness, remind us that in fact, as we speak today, there are displaced persons. And how shall we rise to the occasion ourselves? The challenges are manifold and plenty, and as much as we remember and mourn, our duty is to our own moment and here and now.
So I'll begin just to make a quick comment. I'll begin with a quick comment, and then I actually want to turn to Larry, because Larry and I were talking about how do you walk that line between what's particular in this film and the universal questions that it raises. But there are 65.3 million displaced people in the world right now, which is the largest number since World War II. So just as we're thinking about perspective. But Larry, what do you think? It's a question.
About how we face the issue today. Well, look, what I think is that we've just watched a Holocaust film, and I would rather talk about what we just watched, rather than, although the question is a vitally important one, but I don't think that's why we're here today, to talk about current politics. So I really don't want to comment on that. That will take us away from the film.
So I'll definitely go to other questions, but I do think that it's just important to recognize as humans, as we watch these stories, it's inevitable that we make connections to the world around us. From the particular, I think that's when we start to open our eyes and start to see the universal. And hopefully it's this dialogue back and forth. So anyway, let me turn to that question.
If this is on. Harvey, I want to thank you very much. Thank you, Sheila White. The one thing that I found amazing about this is that I don't think you focus on the story, because everyone has a story, and everyone's story was different, but it was their voice. And that was one thing that you just wanted. It didn't matter how big or how small the story was, you were just allowing the voice. And I think that's something that we can learn from this. It's not always about the story or the event, it's actually just their voice. And I think it's so powerful in the beginning, how you're just, it's their voices. And even if it's over, because it's not, again, the individual, it's just the voice of what they have to say, their ability to say it. Thank you.
Other thoughts here? You want to make a comment back though? And if people can't hear it, I'll repeat the question.
So there's a lot of people in the film that we didn't hear from, and a lot of hours that we didn't hear. Is there some way that a private citizen can listen to the people that we didn't hear, or listen to the hours that weren't provided?
So Harvey, I know that you've been working to try to get these archived and trying to find a right repository for them. Larry also said that many of these tapes are available, so I'll turn to you.
Well, duplicate copies of all of these interviews were deposited at the Fortunato Archive Holocaust Testimonies at Yale University. They have all been digitized, and they are now available free of charge to any college or university that requests them. Brandeis is negotiating right now. You have to watch it at Brandeis, but I think all, maybe one or two, I think all of these are on deposit there, and you can pull up any one of them at Brandeis. Clark University will have them, but that's in Worcester, and request any of these testimonies and watch the whole thing. My own strategy from the beginning is not to watch segments. If I start watching a testimony, and some of them are 5 or 6 hours. The one I did with Rose Muir was 7 hours, although we did it over 3 nights. I watch them from beginning to end because you never know when you're going to come upon a seminal moment. And if you just look at a little bit here and a little bit there, you miss a lot. And if you think what you saw was painful, some of the things that were not in the film are extraordinary because of the vividness and the honesty with which the survivors have described it. Can I say just one other thing very quickly? Because only after watching this film, Harvey, did I realize this. I've been lecturing for decades now on Holocaust testimonies, and almost without exception, the one question everyone asks is, what will happen when the last survivor dies? Okay, there are 2 answers. One brief answer is that the war ended 72 years ago, so that anyone who was 15 years old when the war ended is only 87. I say only because I'm older than that. But people 87, they live another 10 years. So it's going to be a long time before the last survivor dies. But watching this film, it occurred to me for the first time that the proper answer to that question is that the last survivor is never going to die. And that's because we have these testimonies. Most of the people you saw today, are no longer alive. But in a very meaningful and real sense, they are still alive. Because they spoke to us as living people, telling us their stories. So those people who are worried what's going to happen, who is going to tell their stories, they've told their stories. The obligation for us is to watch them. They are painful. I mean, Harvey was absolutely correct when he said it was difficult to watch them. And as I said, I've heard hair-raising stories that I do not repeat to other people. They're so terrible. But they will be available, as I said, especially if you haven't watched the testimony of a member of your family. I urge you to watch it, just so you can get information about your ancestors that you may not have known.
I just wanted to say that these are bits and pieces of them. It took a lot of hard work to put these together. Leon Satinstein would do a pre-interview with each survivor first. You saw that Larry and I both had notes that we were referring to. Those were timelines so that we could prompt the survivor if necessary. We did these interviews in 1 hour increments. We had the clocks going, and you could see how emotional folks were as they were telling us their stories. We had to be careful as we approached the end of each hour to make sure that the survivor was okay. Larry mentioned that one of the interviews went 7 hours. And we did that over a period of weeks. The shortest interview we did was 45 minutes, and I spoke with that person afterwards, and I said, 45 minutes? He said, I just couldn't do it. There was too much to say, and I just couldn't say it all. But and then after the interviews were over, Leon would call the survivor that evening to make sure that he or she was okay. You could tell it when a person is broken down and is crying like that, and there were so many tears. And I can also tell you, when I wasn't doing the interviews, I was sitting in the control room, and there were tears in the control room also.
I want to just start off by saying I think it was very powerful that these weren't audio, that it was a video. So that was a brilliant masterstroke for the Prussians to do it that way. My question is a follow-on to that question that I think dovetails to what we're discussing is, how did you choose these snippets? And I guess this is really to you, Harvey. How did you choose these pieces out of everything that you picked?
I can tell you what was the hardest thing that I've ever done in any professional sense, doing anything. And the reason that it was hard, I'm a writer, and I think I'm a filmmaker, although if you want to tell people that you've seen all my films, you really have seen all my films. I produce video, but I've only made one film. What was hard about it was, so when you're writing, those of you who create, the hardest thing to do is to edit something out. You write the most brilliant sentence, or you take the most incredible shot, or you make them something that you think you're really proud of. This is really good. I mentor young writers, and you see it all the time. They've written this beautiful sentence, and the first part of the essay is like an homage to that sentence. It sort of goes, and then it comes out of this. The whole thing's about the sentence, even though the sentence doesn't fit the story. And so as you get older, you learn that editing is part of it. It stinks because sometimes the best thing that you did, you have to edit out because it doesn't serve the story. But this is totally different because Larry's right. you should watch all of it. I did. But hardly anybody is going to. And I knew that. And I knew that these 90, 80, there were 120 something tapes and they aren't all full. So we don't really know exactly how many, probably 90. I knew that if I edited something out, maybe that voice would never get heard. And it was so difficult because it wasn't about my ego anymore. It wasn't editing out something I thought was brilliant and it didn't serve the story, oh well. But I was editing out a voice of someone who probably spent, some of these people had to build the courage to go do this. And I know from talking to a lot of the families that they suffered a little bit after they did their testimony. And I knew it. And all of the voices were important. And some of the best stuff isn't in here because it didn't serve this particular version, this particular story. And it would cause me great pain because I would think, who the heck am I to be that judge? And then I'd have to sort of go for a long walk. Every time I edited a piece out, I would go for long, long walks. And my wife would tell you I would just be in agony over it. But then you have to forgive yourself sometimes and you have to realize, okay, so how much of this would people hear if you didn't do it? So you just keep going on. But first person, what I felt they came to say, and then sort of tie it together. But it was very difficult. And there were people that were important that weren't in this, that gave their test. There were 10 people out of the 40 gave testimony and they're not in the film. And I think about those 10 people and it's painful. And there are people that are in it for 10 seconds while other people are in it for minutes. And it has to serve the greater good, and it was very difficult to be that person that was the judge of what served the greater good. So it was a responsibility. I hope I did a good job, but that was the hard part. That was a really long answer, sir.
And just as we go to the next question, and there's the other matrix of having to tell the history responsibly in that balance.
We did an extraordinary amount of work so that you could see the short amount of video that you saw. So, then just a question of how to do it in the most responsible way. And I know that Leon Satinstein had his ideas and Stephen Bressler has his ideas, and I think people like Larry Langer should be brought into the discussion to decide those things, and people from Facing History, and Adam serves on the committee. So I think it's important that these stories be shared and that people have access to them and try to find the most responsible way to do it. I can tell you one thing, after someone who's gone through all of these, that it's wrenching, and Larry is right. There are things that stand your hair on end. There are things that just floor you, and so we really don't want a situation where, someone is watching and in the not proper environment where especially if they're a young person and there's no one there to help them. One quick, and I know we had 2 minutes, but one of the people that's in the film was a twin, and it's a 4-hour interview. And 3.5 hours into the interview, you're in the 1970s now, in 1969, so you think, I'm out of it, right? And you find out that the twin committed suicide, one of the twins, because she never really survived the Holocaust. In my opinion, that's how I would describe it. Maybe it's a better way to describe it, but because of these pains, and sometimes it's what happened in a concentration camp, a particular kind of torture, but sometimes it's just that you fall in love with somebody on these tapes, and then something happens to them and it crushes you, and it's not a movie, it's not fiction, it's real, and you know that person lived like a half a mile from your house. And so you know, we just have to find the most responsible way to do it, I think.
So because of time, I know that we need to close. So I want to thank these three people who are much more directly responsible. So Harvey, Stephen, and Larry, for all the work that you've done years ago, the work you did years ago, and the work you've been working on the last few months, and thank you for the Coolidge.